So I'm giving these series of talks in tribute to Louise Hay. How many people have read her books, Louise Hay? Good. You know, too, that if you've read her books, that she really focuses on the things that directly have to become different inside of us. And one of those things is how we handle change. And so today's talk is the healing power of change. And I know a lot of people think that when certain changes are upon them, it doesn't seem to be very healing at the moment, but guaranteed that there is something within the experience which is healing. So to get us started, I'm going to have Reverend Liz Loma read to you from the front of your program something that Louise wrote about change and healing.
The main difference between the way I used to work at releasing beliefs and the way I do it today is that now I don't have to be angry at myself in order to do so. I no longer choose to believe that I'm a bad person just because I find something else to change within me. The mental work I do now is like cleaning a house. I go through my mental rooms and examine the thoughts and beliefs in them. Some I love, so I polish and shine them and make them even more useful. Some I notice need replacement or repair, and I get around to them as I can. Some are like yesterday's newspapers and old magazines or clothing that are no longer suitable. These I either give away or toss into the trash, and I let them be gone forever. It's not necessary for me to be angry or to feel I'm a bad person in order to do this.
Thanks, Liz. Appreciate that. The whole nature of change can make people pretty uncertain, angry. Certainly there's been a lot of changes in our economics that have made people very uncertain and many people very angry. And it's interesting, every time you look at those kinds of changes, usually 10 or 15 years later, or maybe sooner or later, you get to the point where you might say, and this might sound counterintuitive, boy, that was the best thing that could have happened to me at that moment. So it's hard to estimate the goodness that will come from certain changes, but what Louise is talking about first and foremost is the change that has to happen within us. Because always the tendency is to focus on something that we think is happening to us when in fact it's happening through us. And so it's hard to accept responsibility for some of the negative things that happen, or some of the poo-poo people that show up in your life occasionally. So that was nicely said, wasn't it? Poo-poo people. So I remember, I was going to share this little story about my dad. My dad was born in 1905, being his Father's Day, and in the 1920s, as he was becoming a young man, he went to work for Warner Brothers Theaters, and he actually was an usher at the theaters that were owned by Warner Brothers at the time. And all through the 1920s, he kept elevating himself, moving up into management. So eventually he wound up managing theaters. And in 1931 or 32, he became the first manager of the first air-conditioned theater in Chicago, which was a big deal. And he had his own style, very successful at doing this. And then in 1936, Warner Brothers had to sell the theaters because the antitrust board said you can't own the theaters and the production also. But my dad, in the process of becoming very good at being the theater manager, he got to know Harry Warner of Warner Brothers. And the reason he got to know him is because my dad was a scratch golfer, which means he was very talented at playing golf. He actually could play par golf, and at one point he was thinking about turning professional, but Harry would call him in from Chicago to New York City to play in these golf tournaments, because you know when very wealthy people like the Harry Warner brothers of this world, they have golf tournaments, they call in ringers. That was what my dad was. He was a ringer because he knew he could rely upon him to really play well. And so in 1946, when I was born, my family moved to Glendale, California, left Chicago, partly in promise that my dad would get a job with Warner Brothers. Well, that was when World War II was over, and we had 500,000 soldiers coming back into the country, and so the job just disappeared. And for 2 years, he was out of work. Or shall I say, he tried to work at many different things. He tried selling encyclopedias, he tried selling mortuary plots, he tried selling real estate, he tried everything he could think of, and finally, my mother, who got a job as the attendance clerk at the junior high that I went to. Needless to say, I could not cut a day of school, ever. She would find out immediately if I wasn't in second grade or third grade. She got my dad a job as a painter for the Glendale Unified School District. And for the rest of his professional life, as I knew him, I didn't know him as a manager. I knew him as a painter. And every night he would come home, and he had those white pants on with the white shirt that painters tend to wear, and they would have like paint spots all over them, and he'd be tired, exhausted. He'd be sitting there with a cup of coffee, and he'd be falling asleep. And the kids, my sisters in the audience, we'd sit back there and kind of take bets, and when he'd fall asleep and spill his coffee, we would. But the thing I remember most about my dad was he was always there for us. He was always there for us in strength and in work ethic and in kindness. And he was always doing kind things for a lot of people. And so I remember him specifically for that too. And he lived to be 93, for God's sakes. Or 97, excuse me, what am I thinking? 97. How quickly I forget, right? And my sister's out there correcting me right away. She's my really older sister. Okay, so... So a little tension in the audience always gets things interesting. But it's funny that the things we remember about the changes that we went through as kids and the things that my parents were going through, because in the 50s, there was a similar depression to what we're kind of experiencing now. There was a lot of people out of work, and my parents were very fortunate. They both had jobs, and they felt very fortunate. But we were still having spaghetti, 4 or 5 nights a week. And it was like, I didn't care, because as long as there was love, it didn't matter. So you can go through the toughest times possible. As long as you have love, you can handle change. But if you don't have love, then it's difficult to handle change if you don't have a strong sense of yourself. So that's one of the things that Louise is always pointing to, is the necessity to keep changing inside of you. And so a lot of people are kind of confused, well, how do I make that change? How do I train myself to behave in a certain way so I don't overreact or put myself into sort of a corner, psychologically or spiritually, that I can't get out of because of my anger, or because of my fear, or because of my resentment. And that's one of the things Louise Hay is very big on working with people. So she does this exercise, and I'll just bring a chair over. And what she does is she puts the chair on the stage, and she says, now if there's anybody that you need to forgive, think about it for just a moment. I haven't run into anybody who can tell me there isn't somebody that doesn't require their forgiveness. Have them sit in this chair mentally right here. Now I want you to think about what you would say to them. Not the bad things, but could you possibly figure out something to say to them that was life-affirming? Life-affirming. And so it's like, what could I say that would be life-affirming to the person or persons who I think either did me wrong or who I still am angry with or in fear of? What could I say life-affirming? Now, this exercise is so important that unless you figure out how to have this conversation, this person will be sitting next to you the rest of your life. So if you want this person to leave, the key is you have to affirm for them something loving, something positive, and something prosperous. Loving, positive, and prosperous. So just think to yourself what you would say to that person. You can close your eyes if you want to. Think what you would say. Notice your internal feelings too. That how can I say to this person if they did this, this, and this, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da? You have to let that voice go and really forgive them. Okay, open your eyes and forgive them. Now, if you truly do forgive them, and by the way, there's what we call a fake forgiveness. When you didn't really forgive them. You just pretended you were forgiving them. But if you really forgive them, they can get up and leave the room now. And they can leave your life. They don't have to be inside of you anymore. All that toxic nature of people that you're still angry with, and that's toxic not to them, but to you. But now the next person in this chair is, guess who? You. You have to sit here. You have to forgive yourself for everything that you think you made a mistake at. Jesus is quoted for saying that in a certain case where people were getting ready to stone somebody. He said, those who are without sin cast the first stone. Those who are without mistakes cast the first judgment. All of our judgments that are negative about other people are like stones. They just aim at people. And sometimes they hurt, definitely hurt. But the truth of the matter is they hurt us more than they hurt anybody else. So getting rid of that toxic thinking of not forgiving yourself is very important, so you have to forgive yourself. So close your eyes, say something peaceful, prosperous, loving to yourself in the I am message, such as, I am now at peace with who I am. I am now prosperous. Whatever I think might have been taken from me by anybody really was not, because God is my source, not life, God. And so I live in love and cast out all my fear and forgive myself. And so it is. So what you just did was an exercise that Louise frequently does with her clients and people that she talks with. But sometimes that change also has to really last and stay lasting so that it works forever. It requires a constant reminder that we remind ourselves constantly the importance of forgiveness, the importance of not living in fear but living in faith. And one of the things that I do personally is I kind of take an inventory of my skills, I take an inventory of my opportunities, and I take an inventory of my wealth. My skills, my opportunities, and my wealth, because that's all stuff that God gave me. God gave me my skills, God gave me opportunities to apply those skills, and God gave me wealth so I could be supported in the process. But if I take the faculties that God gave me, which includes faith, acceptance, and belief, those are faculties of my mind, and I don't apply those faculties of my mind in constructive, affirmative ways, if I don't do that constructively and affirmatively, I turn right around and I minimize my skills. Have you ever known people who can do something really well and you compliment and they go, oh, that was nothing. And they can't take a compliment. They can't say, wow, that was amazing. What a great job. What a fantastic person you are. And a lot of people just minimize their skills. They minimize their opportunities as if they didn't have any opportunities. The truth is, every moment is an opportunity to apply your skill at being peaceful. Apply your skill at being peaceful, which means that you could decide, instead of being angry today, I think I'm going to really work on being peaceful today. Now that is a conscious thing you have to do. Now, consciousness is kind of like learning how to play golf. Has anybody ever tried to learn how to play golf? How many people failed at it? A couple of you. But in your effort to play golf, you were told to just relax. And that was the last thing on your mind, because you felt so tense. Why? Because people were watching you. They were expecting you to be so amazingly good, and you just couldn't connect the ball with the club. It wouldn't work very well. But I'll tell you a little secret. Even those of us who play golf, we don't think we're doing it very well either. So there's this constant sort of self-criticism, self-putting oneself down constantly. Why? Because very few of us develop a faith of God in ourselves, the faith of God in myself. Do I really believe that God is constantly giving me blessings over and over again by giving me opportunities to practice love, to practice peace, to practice joy today? See, if you made a conscious effort to say, I'm going to be loving, peaceful, and joyful, then when you go out to play, whatever games you're playing, whatever work you're doing, would you not do a better job? Absolutely. Hands down, a much better job. So why is it that we become so hypnotized by the conditions and the people and circumstances around us that we begin to believe not in our worth, but our unworthiness or self-sacrifice instead of self-awareness? We're always feeling like we're having to give up something. How many of you had parents that were always saying that they were sacrificing for you? See? So when you had parents who were always saying they're sacrificing for you, they weren't sacrificing for you. They just didn't understand how to share in a loving, affirmative way. Because their parents probably told them they were sacrificing. So the whole sacrifice thing gets passed on from generation to generation until you come along and start affirming. Doing what? Affirm. Say that again. Affirm. Yeah, because you see, if you don't learn to affirm the positive, productive, loving things in your life, then most of your day is going to be spent in what we call negative affirmations. Where, how could I have been so stupid? Or, how about this one? Why didn't I see that coming? How many of you ever said that to yourself? Why didn't I see that coming? So like, you were supposed to be aware of everything. Well, you don't see things coming because that's how you learn. You learn by handling change in a loving, productive, peaceful way. Now, some of you know that recently Patty and I had a fire at our house, and we're still living in a hotel, by the way. We're just starting now to get things put back together inside the house. They painted it this last week, and they're getting ready to install the carpeting, which is great. But I walked into the house, and the guy told me, he said, I said, well, why do you have to paint everything? He said, because there's always the smell of smoke in walls. It just becomes buried in the wall. And I couldn't smell it because I was too close to it. When there's like, you smell a fireplace, you don't smell it after a while. So the garage has yet to be painted. They're actually going to paint the garage. And they're going to clean it. And so I walked into the house, and I walked into the garage, and it smelled like a fireplace. And for the first time, I could actually smell the smoke that they were talking about. And the same thing is true with toxic beliefs. You don't feel them. You don't sense them. You don't react to them in a loving, affirmative way. You just accept that there's this negativity in the world, and it's part of a natural way of living your life. It's not natural. It's like teaching a bear to ride a bicycle. That's not natural. But you see it every day in a circus, and you think, well, there goes another bear riding a bicycle. So you think it's natural. It's not natural. It's not natural to be afraid. It's not natural to be angry. It's not natural to be resisting life. And yet, if I'm saying that right now, there's a part of you, I know for a fact, that's saying, I don't understand that because I have never known life without fear. I have never known life without anger. And there's some people that just have never known. At least a part of my life has to be spent in anger. It's just like Louise said, I don't have to get angry anymore to get going. Some people say in order to get started, I have to throw a fit. So you get angry and you throw that fit, and that's what gets you started. If you do that enough times, the only way that'll ever motivate you to get going is if you get angry at yourself. And how many of you were taught that experience? I remember reading a book by Louise Hay, and she was talking about a client of hers who was frequently took naps as a person, but every time that she took a nap, she felt guilty. And she traced it back to the fact that every time she took a nap at home when she was a kid, her mother would accuse her of being lazy. You can't sleep. Get up there and work. Go do something. But yet we know that rest is power. If you don't learn how to rest, it's true, isn't it? If you don't learn how to rest, you don't have power. And what kind of power are we talking about? Not the power to control, not the power to manipulate. We're talking about the power to be loving and peaceful and joyful and to be prosperous. You can't be those things unless you're well rested. So no wonder everybody's like cranky all the time. You need to take a nap and have some cookies. Lay down, relax, and take some deep breaths. And don't accuse yourself of being lazy because you need to rest. It's very important. So that's a skill. It's a skill that you apply yourself to life to. I have the skill of knowing how to rest. And most of you don't think that's a skill. It's an art form. It's an art form to be resting. Now some of you might say, I know that person. All they do is rest. Well, that may be true. But is that your business or theirs? That's their business, not your business. The important thing is, do you get any rest? Do you really take time for yourself? So there's the skills, there's the opportunity, and then there is the wealth. Now, if you don't learn how to share wealth, because some of you think you actually earn wealth. Like, if I ask a bunch of you, do you think you're wealthy? Probably a lot of people would say, no, I don't think I'm wealthy. But the truth is, you're rich beyond all imagination. You have things in your life that are so phenomenal that very few people in the world have them. I mean that. You are some of the wealthiest, richest people on the planet, including myself. But you say to yourself, but I don't feel wealthy. I don't feel wealthy. Why don't I feel wealthy? Well, maybe it's because you were taught that to be wealthy was not necessarily a proper thing to do. Now, if you grew up with rich parents, that was never an issue, was it? That was the thing. But if you grew up with parents where wealth was seen as perhaps something less than ethical, less than okay, do you think it's entirely possible that you could be experiencing a lack and limitation because you've gotten used to that by thinking that's natural? It's not natural at all. You and I were designed to be wealthy beyond imagination, and we are. But we have to apply our faith, and we have to apply our acceptance. Now, acceptance is absolutely important. When was the last time you sat down, seriously, and took even 5 minutes to think what your life would be like if you had 3 times the amount of wealth that you currently have? When was the last time you seriously did that? See, Louise would say, if you don't do that, you can't expect anything to arrive. Because if you don't set the intention, and if you don't have the mental equivalent set in mind, why would God supply you anything? Because God only gives it to you as you believe it to be true. God only gives it to you as you believe it to be true. So if you don't believe it's true, if you believe you're lacking and limited, then God has to give you a life that's lacking and limited. Because if you think it's not working, it has to work by appearing not to work. I'll say it again. It has to work by appearing not to work. So it's all your belief system. Faith, acceptance, and belief. So this week, Patty and I celebrated our 10th anniversary, which is great. So we always say to each other, I don't know, what do you want to do? She says, I don't know, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Back and forth. Well, let's go someplace really nice for dinner. So we went to the, well, I call it the Noisy Broad, but it's on PCH, it's called the Quiet Woman. So we're at the Quiet Woman, wonderful restaurant. And my brother calls me halfway through the day, and he says, happy anniversary. And I said, well, thanks, Terry. He says, what are you doing? I said, we're going to the Quiet Woman. And Terry says, I'll send you some champagne. I say, oh, yeah, sure. Sure enough, at our table, compliments of my brother, comes a bottle of champagne. Amazing. And then we ordered the food. My sister, too. I forgot that. That's 2. But who's counting? So who's counting, right? And my sister and my brother, and also my brother's girlfriend, Sherry, sent that too. Compliments of all 3 of them. Thank you very much, Gil. Appreciate that. So then we're sitting there, and the bill comes. Now, the Quiet Woman is not a cheap restaurant, but the service was magnificent. So what did we do? We calculated a great tip. And with great joy, I put that, because I'm sharing the wealth back, because I'm served so beautifully. And thinking to myself, I wonder if people think of it this way when they're in church. That you receive such a fantastic meal, that your giving was easy. Now, I know we're not Christian, we're not Jewish, we're not Hindu, we're not Buddhist, we are religious scientists, which means we believe in the inclusiveness of all religion, all spirituality. But a friend of mine, J. Scott Neal, was listening to Jimmy Swaggart a couple of years ago, and he shared this with me, that Swaggart was on the radio, and he was preaching away about giving for Jesus. Well, we don't teach that. We don't give for Jesus. We live for Jesus. We don't give for Jesus. So we can't hit you with guilt or shame. So what does Swaggart do? He pulls out this thing in this wall. He says, I want you to take a look at your wallet right now. Now, I know you're looking at the 5, but Jesus is looking at the 20. One of my favorite stories. God, the nerve of him to say that, you know. But the truth of the matter is, he's attaching spiritual value to wealth. And that's a really important lesson. If you don't do that, if you don't learn how to do that, why would life serve you? Seriously, why would life serve you if you did not give back? Absolutely essential. Now, I want you to know something. I'm not doing it because I want you to give us more money. I want you to learn how to share. Share that wealth, because you have wealth. You've been blessed with wealth. But if you can't see it, it's because you haven't accepted it. When you accept it as yours, it flows right to you. But it flows in ways that you can't imagine. Because that's what God, that's why it says it's a mystery. It's a mystery how all the goodness comes together. And so when it comes together, it means that everything gets done. And one thing I've learned about patience, just have a fire in your house and see how long it takes to fix things. We've been out of our house now for 7 weeks. Longer than I ever anticipated. The house could have been fixed fine in about a week. But every step of the way has a different process. And what am I thinking? I'm thinking like I'm not grateful because it's all getting put back together, because it is. So is everything in your life being put back together. Why am I or you so impatient? Why are you so impatient? It's because you have little faith, you have little acceptance, you have little belief, And because you're not applying the skill of love and peace, you're not taking the opportunity to apply love and peace to your friends, and you're not sharing your love. All those things matter, and I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to me. I'm sitting in that chair right now reminding myself of the truth, and that's the truth. You've got to take care of life by living in love with God and serving and using the skills you've been given with peace, not anger. Just make a commitment to yourself this week. I refuse to live one more day in anger. Say that.
I refuse to live one more day in anger.
And if you catch yourself in anger, you say, wait, do that. Wait. I promised Dr. Jim I would not live my life in anger this week. I'm going to live it in peace.